Hi, everybody. My name is Kevin, and I'll be focusing on the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness and the mineral leases that are threatening the watershed of that protected area in Minnesota. I'm a MELP student. I'll be attempting to do a legal brief on the subject. I think it's more fitting given the stage it's at. There's some early court decisions, but there's still a lot riding up in the air and a lot of pending litigation against the federal defendants. So I think a legal brief would be a lot more fitting than an affidavit in this situation. So the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness has two mineral leases posing damage to the watershed of the Superior National Forest, which is the overlying federal area that the Boundary Waters are located in. So I'm going to dive into a little bit of the history of the Boundary Waters and then talk about the issues themselves and then touch on the common law. And hope you get a lot out of this. And if you've got any information on this already, this is all preliminary research. So yeah, shoot it my way, please. It'd be much appreciated. So the Boundary Waters was originally protected through the enactment of the Wilderness Act in 1964. Like I said, it's located in the Superior National Forest. As part of the Wilderness Act, there are special boundary water regulations that were prepared in accordance with the Act. And what that does is provide administrative duties for the management today for the Superior National Forest who manages the land, the U.S. Forest Service. With revisions every 10 years, those management requirements are still in effect today, and they focus on the dedication to the public for use and enjoyment. The Boundary Waters is a glaciated landscape. It's about 1,100 lakes connected by portages, which is streams, rivers, and waterways that connect basically bodies of water and small islands of land. It shares a watershed with the Canadian National Park, the Quetico Provincial Park. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. It's a very unique situation. It creates a transboundary international wilderness area that covers almost 2 million acres. And it runs along northern Minnesota, about 150 miles long along the Canadian border. As far as historical protections of the Boundary Waters, to supplement the Wilderness Act came 14 years later, the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness Act, and that was a specific protection for some of the pre-existing uses within the area and just established designated areas within the wilderness area itself. The two designated areas it created, the first one being the Canoe Area Wilderness for recreation, and the second one being a mining protection area, which actually runs outside of the Boundary Waters Wilderness within the Superior National Forest in an attempt to preserve the Rainy River watershed, which is the watershed that makes up the Boundary Waters. All told, that statute protects about 1 million acres, 220,000 of which are mining protected areas, meaning no mining allowed in those areas. Some of the specific provisions for that act specifically, it focuses on environmental quality and avoidance of adverse impacts associated with mineral development. And one of the things I found interesting is that it doesn't necessarily protect just its own borders. It goes into the navigable waters. So if there's some mineral activity outside of those areas that are affecting the watershed through the navigable waters or affecting the wilderness qualities or natural value of the protected area, then those are also covered under this act, which I found pretty cool. Another part of the act that's interesting is that it actually establishes the expansion of recreation uses and area or opportunities. So that's another key part in the legal brief, because a lot of the a lot of the mining leases are riding on economic value, and there's actually a large economic value with the recreational side as well. So lastly, that creates a comprehensive implementation strategy, and it integrates with the U.S. Forest Service for the long-term planning and management plan of the Superior National Forest. So it integrates it all together, and it runs through the USFS for the land itself. For the mineral leases, they'll be running through the BLM, as we learned in this class. Lastly, as a bit of history, is the tribal history. The Minnesota Chippewa tribe is very prevalent in that area, and that is comprised of 6 individual tribes, many of which have long-standing treaty rights to hunt, fish, gather. They gather wild rice in the area throughout the watershed. So I think that's going to play a major part in the legal brief as well. It's come up in 2 of the litigation court cases that I've read so far, and I think also touching upon our textbook reading from this week, I'll get into some of the winter right stuff too. So to move on to the main issues, the 2 copper sulfide mines, or the leases of them. The first being the one I'm not going to spend as much time on, and that's the Polymet mineral lease. And the reason for not spending so much time on that, it's a little bit mature in its, it's more mature in its, I guess, history through the courts. It just, January 13th of this year, made it through the Court of Appeals, where they actually remanded the case be heard for a contested case hearing and reversed the permit that the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources had approved for the mine itself. And there's a lot of interesting history within that project, some scandalous stuff. It appears that the EPA comments from their research was transferred to the Minnesota DNR through verbal confirmation and was never actually written down. So there's a lot of impactful statements that never reached the public and were never had the opportunity for public input. So some scandalous stuff that'll be fun to check out. It will play a minor part in the Twin Metals mine, which is the one I'll be focusing on, simply because it's dated to come first, so it will serve as precedent. There's never been a copper sulfide mine in the Superior National Forest, so if Polymet comes through, it'll make the Twin Metals mine a little bit easier to get through. So that brings me to the Twin Metals mine, which is the one I'll be focusing on, which is actually 2 separate leases, one of which is directly adjacent to the boundary waters, and the second of which is within 3 miles of the boundary waters. Both are within the Rainy River watershed. This one has its own pretty scandalous history, less scandalous, I would say, than the leaked emails of the Polymet case. But this one has a Forest Service opinion to the BLM stating that the BLM has the right to approve or deny the mineral lease permit, but also a Forest Service opinion stating very clearly with a lot of information why it would be unacceptable from their opinion to approve the lease based on the adverse environmental impacts of copper sulfide mining. Followed by a moratorium from the Obama administration right before he left office for all mining in that whole area, which was then, no surprise, taken away by the Trump administration in 2017 by the DOI, and they released an opinion saying that the previous Forest Service opinion was actually based in legal error. Yeah, that was it. So then following that is the June 2018 motion for summary judgment by Friends of the Boundary Waters against the federal defendants, and that was to stop the reinstatement of the expired leases. Fast forward to February of this year, February 4th, and the plaintiffs' friends of the Boundary Waters and all of the associated groups that were comprised within that case filed a complaint for a Freedom of Information Act request related to that June 2018 court decision, and that being a lot of the as part of the Obama mineral lease moratorium, there was a 2-year deep dive environmental impact study on copper sulfide mining in the Rainy River watershed. That was pulled 4 months before completion and never released to the public. So that the complaint filed most recently is Freedom of Information Act to request to see that study and the findings from that study. Interestingly, that came the very same week as House Bill 5598, which Senator McCollum submitted to the Committee of Natural Resources for the House of Representatives, and that intends to provide protection for the boundary waters, the interconnected federal lands, including the Rainy River watershed, and Voyageurs National Park, which is the Canadian National Park, part of the Quetico Provincial Park. So it's a pretty hotbed issue. There's a House bill. They're tackling it through the Senate, while simultaneously there's two separate cases going on. One arguing to stop the reinstatement of the expired leases, and which the Trump administration and the DOI is attempting to renew. And these kind of simultaneous avenues are all going to play a part in the legal brief and what my expected outcome of this case will be. So it's going to be a fun one. Things I could use some help with. I could not find the court decision from the June 2018 case. I'm not positive if it made it all the way through yet, but I'm just having some trouble getting the official documentation. I found some articles stating the outcome of that case, but it didn't seem all that official, and as well as the filed complaint by Friends of Boundary Water in February, also having a hard time locating that one. And I think it's because all of these things kind of came to head right before everyone went on quarantine, and a lot of these documents are just not available to the public. So if you have any information on those, I don't think it'll be too big of a hurdle for my legal brief, mostly because their whole arguments laid out in the motion summary judgment, and I can run with that and tie it into the House bill, which was put out in February, that I have a copy of, so I kind of see where their argument's headed. But if anyone has any information on those or any pointers or tips for boundary waters and the mineral leases that they're facing, I'm kind of new to this issue. I followed it a little bit from my last class. One of the students there raised it as a local issue in one of our modules. So that's where I kind of was turned on to it, and I've just been interested in it since. So I'm looking forward to learning some more and diving in. So thank you very much, and look forward to our last class together. Good luck on your assignments.